Welcome to the Restricted Handling Daily Intel Brief. This is what's been going on in Iran and the Middle East in the past 24 hours. U.S. officials, according to multiple reports, believed Israel may have considered moving against senior Iranian figures involved directly in the negotiation process, including Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. That concern reportedly got serious enough that Washington went through intermediaries to warn Tehran that those individuals could be at risk. And that detail matters more than any single operational claim because it shows how brittle the system has become. The U.S. is trying to preserve a negotiating channel that can still produce a framework agreement. Israel is still operating with a logic that prioritizes dismantling Iranian strategic capacity, even if that creates friction with U.S. sequencing. And Iran is sitting in the middle of that, trying to negotiate while also planning as if parts of its leadership remain potential targets. So even before you get to economics, energy, or regional proxies, you already have a diplomatic environment where trust is not just low, it is actively under pressure from multiple directions at once. Now, layer in the Strait of Hormuz, because this is where diplomacy turns into physical leverage. Iran has been escalating its effort to enforce its own traffic routing scheme in the strait, essentially pushing commercial vessels to follow Iranian designated lanes as part of what it frames as maritime authority. Military leadership tied to Iran's Central Operational Command has warned that any deviation or interference could trigger rapid response. What is important here is the shift in framing. This is no longer just about transit safety or navigation disputes. It is about control signaling. Iran is attempting to convert shipping behavior into implied recognition of sovereignty over the waterway. At the same time, the U.S. and regional partners, including Oman, are still trying to stabilize the situation through financial incentives, including discussions around frozen Iranian assets. But Tehran's posture so far suggests it sees maritime control as something closer to strategic ground it holds onto, not something easily traded away for economic relief. So you get this odd split screen. On one side, talks about de-escalation and economic access. On the other, enforcement behavior that treats shipping lanes as a tool of pressure. And then inside Iran itself, you have a very deliberate display of state power unfolding around the death of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. The funeral process is not just one event. It is a multi-stage national and regional sequence moving through Tehran, Qom, and major Shiite centers in Iraq before final burial in Mashhad. The scale of it is meant to signal continuity, cohesion, and authority at a moment when the system is actually managing a lot of internal stress at once. Because beneath the ceremony, succession dynamics are still not fully settled in public view. Mojtaba Khamenei remains a central figure in most reporting on internal positioning, but visibility has been limited following wartime injury reporting. And at the same time, the broader political environment inside Iran is carrying the weight of sanctions pressure, repeated internal unrest over the past several years, and a security apparatus that has become more dominant in daily governance. So externally, the message is unity and stability. Internally, the system is still working through elite alignment questions while trying to avoid signaling vulnerability during a highly sensitive transition period. Now move west to the border regions, where Iran's security focus is tightening in a very direct way. Iranian forces have stepped up operations against Kurdish militant groups along the Iraq-Iran border, including missile and drone strikes in Iraqi Kurdistan and direct engagements inside Iranian territory. Groups like PJAK and PDKI continue to operate in fragmented networks across rugged border terrain, and Iranian forces are treating these groups less as isolated insurgents and more as potential nodes in a wider instability map. The strategic concern here is not that Kurdish factions are close to challenging the state militarily. They are not. The concern is what happens if domestic pressure inside Iran increases again and these border networks become active support structures for wider unrest. So the current Iranian approach looks preventative, focused on denying future scaling rather than responding to immediate existential threat. At the same time, Iraq sits in a very different kind of pressure environment. The U.S. has resumed dollar shipments to Iraq's central banking system after earlier suspensions tied to concerns about Iranian linked militia financing and corruption networks. This might sound like a technical financial adjustment, but in Iraq, it functions as one of the core levers of state stability. Access to U.S. dollar liquidity directly affects government functionality, import capacity, and internal financial equilibrium. The resumption suggests partial alignment or at least temporary recalibration, but the underlying tension remains unresolved. Iranian-aligned militia networks still hold significant influence inside Iraq's security and political structure, and Washington continues to use financial access as leverage to push Baghdad towards stronger enforcement against those groups. So Iraq is effectively operating inside a three-way constraint system: domestic governance needs, U.S. financial pressure, and Iranian regional influence. Now shift to Lebanon, where the security picture is evolving in a different but connected way. Israeli forces are reporting incremental improvements in counter-drone detection systems, particularly against FPV drones used by Hezbollah. These are low-cost, highly adaptable systems that rely on speed, swarm tactics, and unpredictability rather than traditional precision. Even modest improvements in detection and warning times are changing how ground units operate, but not eliminating the threat. At the same time, Israeli operations continue in southern Lebanon, targeting Hezbollah infrastructure, including underground facilities and weapons caches. What stands out here is the persistence of the underground dimension of the conflict. Facilities, tunnels, and storage sites remain central to Hezbollah's operational resilience, and clearing them is a slow, repetitive process rather than a decisive one-time event. This is also where the broader regional military evolution becomes visible. Iran's broader ecosystem of low-cost drone warfare continues to shape how all actors think about air defense sustainability. Shahed-style systems in particular represent a model built around scale and cost imbalance. The idea is not technological superiority, but economic exhaustion of the defender. High-end interceptors being used against low-cost, mass-produced drones creates a long-term resource strain that reshapes defense planning across multiple theaters. That logic has now been exported well beyond Iran itself, influencing conflicts in Europe and the Middle East simultaneously. And finally, there is a quieter intelligence and cyber layer sitting underneath all of this. A former European lawmaker involved in surveillance oversight investigations was reportedly targeted multiple times using Pegasus spyware. The significance here is not just the targeting itself, but the environment it reflects. Tools designed for counterterrorism and intelligence operations are now embedded in political and institutional spaces where oversight is supposed to happen. That blurs the line between observer and target in a way that complicates accountability across multiple governments and contractors. Thank you for listening and for contributing to the growth of this community. If you found the show valuable, a review or a thoughtful comment helps extend its reach to others. For more in-depth analysis, we publish a daily intel brief on Substack, restrictedhandling.substack.com, covering Russia, China, Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK. Take care and have a great day.